Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday gathering. Today's topic is Creating Enlightened Society, the Path of Regenerative Activism. And our host, our speaker today is Dawn Hall. Dawn has served in a variety of capacities throughout the Transition Towns movement over the last 15 years, and is currently the training coordinator for the International Transition Network. He is also the author of the forthcoming book, The Regeneration Handbook, Transform Yourself to Transform the World. Dawn holds a master's in environmental leadership from Naropa University, is a certified permaculture designer, and lives in community in Boulder, Colorado. Dawn, we're so glad you're here, and so I will turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Just one correction, the book is actually out since I think we started working together on this program. So happy to share about some of that. But let me get my PowerPoint presentation up. And yeah, I'm really happy to be talking with you about creating enlightened society. Obviously, this is something that's very important for our Shambhala community, and something I've given a lot of thought to over the years. I first encountered the teachings of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche over 20 years ago, and have been practicing meditation for longer than that. And I see the work that I've been doing in the Transition Towns movement, writing this book, as very complementary to this idea of creating enlightened society in Shambhala. And yeah, even though we're far apart in our own little boxes here on Zoom, we could imagine that we're sitting in a circle here underneath the aspens, just to the side of the Great Stupa. So yeah, making enlightened society possible, creating enlightened society is kind of our thing in Shambhala, right? It's often our tagline. And it's a big part of our vision of what we're doing here. As we can see, this is the current vision statement from the Shambhala International Shambhala Global website. Our vision is to help people discover their basic goodness. From this place of kindness and confidence, we can work together to create compassionate, sustainable, and just human societies. We call this creating enlightened society. So I think this is a beautiful vision and a big part of what attracted me to Shambhala in the first place. But something that I've noticed is that when this idea of creating enlightened society comes up in Shambhala, often it's kind of downplayed a little bit. You know, we talk about it as the relationship between two people, how we create enlightened society there, or how we create enlightened society at the household level. But I think the times that we're living in, with an unprecedented global polycrisis that is environmental, but also social and economic, these times are calling us to a more expansive definition of creating enlightened society. And I think this was a vision that Chogyam Trungpa shared. This is a quote from Shambhala Sacred Path of the Warrior, the very first chapter, which is called Creating an Enlightened Society. He said, "We must try to think beyond our homes, beyond the fire burning in the fireplace, beyond sending our children to school or getting to work in the morning. We must try to think about how we can help the world. If we don't help, nobody will. So this was back in 1978, and he could already, I think, see a lot of the problems that we're facing today starting to develop. All the issues and contradictions with our heavily growth-based and materialistic modern civilization. And as we know, over the past 50 years, most of these problems have only gotten much, much worse. So I think it bears contemplation to think about what might Chogyam Trungpa be saying to us today about our global situation if he were still alive? What would he be saying about creating enlightened society today if he were still alive? So I know that a lot of us are doing a lot of amazing things to help bring about a better world in Shambhala. But I also know that there's probably a lot of us that want to do more and could do more. And playing off that last part of Chogyam Trungpa's quote about if we don't help, nobody will. I ask this question, if not us, who? We've received so many amazing teachings and practices that can help us be part of creating enlightened society in the larger world through Shambhala. So we have, the practice of shamatha vipassana meditation. We have Tonglen. We have raising wind horse. We have the stroke of Ashe. We have all these incredible practices that are designed to produce qualities of steadiness, clear seeing, of courage, of compassion, confidence, that are really some of the very most important qualities I think that we need in the world right now for effective and transformative leadership. We also, have this great Eastern Sun vision. We're training ourselves not just to see all the obstacles, not just all the problems in the world, but how we could bring more sanity, more kindness, more compassion, more life into the present moment. We have the Rigden, the primordial Rigden as our model, the holder of the family. Our model is an enlightened ruler, or we could say an enlightened leader. And we have this path of spiritual warriorship, which I think is very needed in our current context, because, the situation doesn't look particularly good. The challenges that we're facing at this point in history are massive. They're hugely complex and very urgent. And we need to go forward regardless and do what we can to bring about a more enlightened society. So I think we have already a lot of the qualities that are needed to really help our world. And there's no one right way to do this. There's so many things that need to be done in our world, from getting out there and protesting in the streets to, starting organic farms and local businesses to teaching and caregiving. So many things that need to be done and so many paths for so many different people. But I do want to talk to you today about one that I think is particularly aligned with Shambhala, and that is the path of regenerative activism that I mentioned in the title of this talk. Something I've been doing for about 16 years now, through the Transition Towns movement, but also through permaculture and local food systems work, and intentional communities. And it really represents a different kind of activism than the one that most of us are familiar with. The demonstrations, the direct actions, the different forms of political activism. Yeah, so I think that conventional activism, regenerative activism, or what I call evolutionary change, um, are very different, but they're also very complementary. I mean, obviously, we need both, and one or the other is not enough. But yeah, we typically know a lot more about this kind of conventional activism because it's very showy. As we see it on the evening news, we hear, politicians talk about it. Not so with regenerative activism and evolutionary change. But I think actually in these times that we're currently in, that evolutionary change or regenerative activism may actually be even more appropriate, and more effective, more powerful. So where conventional activism is typically focused on a single issue, evolutionary change is holistic, uh, exceptionally so. Looking at both the interpersonal, and the collective dimensions of change, looking at all the different aspects of our society that need to be redesigned for living in harmony with nature, living in balance with the natural world. Where conventional activism is typically focused on fighting the bad, which is obviously important. Evolutionary change looks at how can we build more of the good? How can we start creating the world that we really want, without necessarily waiting for permission from big government or big business. Conventional activism typically seeks to reform our current systems. But in these times, I think we also, maybe more importantly, need to create systemic alternatives, that we can't just tinker with what we already have. We need an entirely new paradigm guiding our food system, our economy, our transportation system, our energy systems, healthcare, education, so forth. Conventional activism also tends to either focus on individual behavior change or on the largest levels of policy change, global, national, which a lot of people don't feel a lot of agency over. And, a lot of people understandably also have big doubts about individual behavior change. Will it really ever add up to anything significant enough to really change our world? And it typically proceeds in a kind of oppositional way. There's a that us and a them, and creates that kind of divide, which is, sometimes necessary to advance change. But on the other hand, we have evolutionary change is really focused on the collective power of local communities coming together and is very collaborative, creates very inclusive spaces where we can get beyond our superficial differences and think about, really what kind of future do we want to create together? Conventional activism tends to be top down and very highly coordinated, kind of standardized, regimented. Um, Whereas evolutionary change is more bottom up. It's more a philosophy of letting 1,000 flowers bloom. That we need to encourage innovation because we really don't know what is going to work. What is really going to take hold and create the change that we need. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, conventional activism really works within the parameters of the dominant paradigm. It plays by its rules in order to win at its game. Whereas evolutionary change or regenerative activism is rooted in natural principles and patterns. We could even say spiritual principles and patterns, which is playing an entirely different game than the dominant paradigm. And I think, for all of these reasons, if we look at this, I think Shambhala philosophy and the way of Shambhala is much more aligned with evolutionary change, regenerative activism than with types of conventional activism, and could be, a good path for those of us who feel so inspired. So speaking of natural, spiritual, universal patterns of change, in the Regeneration Handbook, I identified 4 meta patterns called meta patterns because they show up throughout history in many different cultures, across many different kinds of fields at different scales. We see them over and over again when we start to embrace this more natural, more spiritual approach to change. And the first one that I came across was the U shape of transformation. That's called for Otto Scharmer's theory U, which some of you might be familiar with through the U Labs that Shambhala has been doing in partnership with the Presencing Institute. Folks might also be familiar with this through Joanna Macy's spiral of the work that reconnects. Joanna Macy, a Buddhist scholar and eco-philosopher, who's put together this amazing body of work for personal transformation and social change. And some people might know this from Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, which also talks about the kind of underlying universal pattern of transformation. But we know this through our own Buddhist heritage, through things like the 3 prajnas, hearing, contemplating, and meditating. Or through the practice of meditation itself, where we are letting go of our thoughts in order to more fully embrace the present moment and see what emerges from that. In all cases, this is basically a process of letting go of our preconceptions of who we think we are, what we think we know, in order for something genuinely new to arise. which is precisely what's needed in our times. That we need to go on a journey of not knowing in order to discover what's on the other side of that, to discover a way to a truly just, sustainable, and regenerative society. So there's very much alignment here with this principle of transformation and how change actually happens, which is very different from the dominant paradigm of predicting control, which I'm afraid is not likely to work very well in our current context, dealing with this unprecedented global environmental crisis. The second meta pattern of evolutionary change is the ripples of expansion. And this is basically about starting wherever we are and allowing change to gradually expand out, organically expand out from there. In evolutionary change or regenerative activism, I think it's extremely important that we start with ourselves, that we work on ourselves and we work on our everyday household, family, work, school level. As Chogyam Trungpa said, if we don't put our own household in order first, our contribution to the wider world could result in further chaos. So it's very important that we've done at least enough of our own inner work that our contribution to the wider world is not further chaos. So we work on ourselves, we work on our household everyday level, but then we ripple out beyond that. We don't stop there. As we're able to, we bring our basic goodness into our community, into our country, into the wider world. And this is very similar with the three yanas in our tradition. Kind of the same logic is that, we start off with Hinayana, self-discipline, settling our minds, cultivating an upright, uplifted life. And then if we can do that, then we have the space naturally to want to try to help others, to try to be bodhisattvas in the world. And then through that process, we start to long for, I think, the skillful means of the Vajrayana to make an even more profound impact and to better help sentient beings. The third meta pattern here is the mandala of wholeness, and this is actually based on the mandala of the 5 Buddha families, which, as some of us know, is a very complex topic. But in this current context, what it symbolizes for me is that creating complete and sacred, balanced and diverse wholes, that we place our central principle in the center, that the Buddha principle that enables everything else to thrive. But we also do need to develop various other aspects. We're not just one thing. We have this kind of Vajra potential of clear perception, enlightened seeing, the Ratna potential of great equanimity and richness, the Padma potential of enlightened passion and discriminating awareness, wisdom, and the karma potential of all accomplishing action, right? And, at each scale of evolutionary change, regenerative activism, whether that's the individual, the group, a whole organization, a whole movement, we're looking at, what is our central principle? And what are all the different elements that are needed to create the mandala at that level? And then finally, the yin yang of balance. And we can see this in Shambhala, in strong back and soft front in meditation. The indivisibility of wisdom and compassion. Not too tight, not too loose. So many different ways. And in evolutionary change, in regenerative activism, we can see this in balance between action and reflection, strategy and emergence, and also between regenerative activism and more conventional forms of activism, that both are needed. And that I think this view of regenerative activism, if it's not too much to say, points us to a non-dual approach to change making, where it isn't this or that, but it's this and that. So lots of deep alignment here between Shambhala principles in this way of change making. But what does it actually look like? What does it actually do? So I'm biased, obviously, but I still think one of the best examples of evolutionary change in action is the International Transition Towns movement that I've been part of for the past 16 years. I first stumbled across the transition movement when I was going to Naropa University, grad student in environmental leadership, and needed to work on an applied leadership project with a local organization. And I found this organization that was called Boulder County Going Local at the time, but became the first official transition initiative in North America as Transition Boulder County and Transition Colorado. And I learned a lot from that experience, but decided in 2010 to move back to my sometimes hometown of Sarasota, Florida, and start a local transition initiative there called Transition Sarasota. Did that for 7 years before going on to work with the national support organization for the transition movement in the United States called Transition US, and served as executive director for a couple of years before going on sabbatical to write my book and starting to work with the International Transition Network, which is the global support hub for this movement, as training coordinator. And for those of you who aren't familiar with transition, it started in 2005 in England, and has since spread around the world to over 1,000 communities in 50 countries and counting. And every transition initiative looks a little bit different because this is not a top-down organization. It's not, the international headquarters telling everybody what to do, but rather encouraging people to come together in their local communities to really look at what is our community's greatest needs? What are its opportunities? What are people most excited about working on? And taking the lead from that. So every transition initiative looks a little bit different, but they all have a few things in common as well. And one is this understanding that we simply can't continue on the same path that we've been on. According to the Global Footprint Network, if everybody lived like the average American, we would need 5.1 Earths to support us. Our way of life is fundamentally unsustainable. And so just tinkering with business as usual is not going to cut it. We need to change everything. Transition also has a common vision of a relocalized and regenerative future. So people living more locally, producing more of what they need locally, and taking greater responsibility for shaping the future of their local community. And then a third thing that all transition groups share in common is a basic organizing model, which is how we get from here to there, how we get from our current unsustainable status quo to a future that is truly regenerative. And there's been a number of different ways to describe this transition model over the past, 19 years now of the transition movement. My favorite happens to be the 5 stages of transition, because they show a clear and accessible pathway from starting out as just one person with a dream, with a calling, with an inspiration to try to make the world a better place, try to create enlightened society. Maybe starting out with no money, no resources, no pre-existing connections other than the people they happen to know, and no prior experience doing this kind of work, which is the situation that most of us are in. And how can we gradually scale that up over time to where it has a real meaningful impact on the future, on our local community, but also on the world as a whole? I think that there's a lot of people out there, who genuinely care about our world, but think, what can I possibly do that's going to make a real difference? And I think the 5 stages of transition are one answer to that question. And I also trust the 5 stages of transition because they very closely aligned with my own experience doing transition on the ground in Sarasota, Florida, through Transition Sarasota. So appropriately enough, 5 stages of transition start out with the stage of starting out. No need to get too complicated here. So the starting out stage is, about this individual, could be you, could be somebody else, that really gets inspired by this idea of transition, regeneration, and decides they want to do something about it. And the first steps are to bring together a group of like-minded people who also are inspired by this vision, who also want to do this, because we can't do it alone. Can't do it alone. And that's called the initiating group, because It's not necessarily the people who are going to be running this transition initiative forever. It's not about creating a little power base for ourselves, but it's about helping to shepherd this initiative, at least through its early stages. And then doing awareness raising events. Could be educational events, could be reskilling workshops, could be community dialogues that bring people together. Sort of like raising a flag, saying, we're here, we're doing this, we're creating enlightened society. Who wants in? And people come. The people who are already, waiting for something like this to emerge in their community come, and they become a base of support for the further development of the initiative. And they also provide direction for the further development of the initiative. So it's not just a one-way communication where we're trying to download a bunch of information, but we're asking people, what do you think we should do? What is most valuable here? What are you most excited about? So in the first year or so of Transition Sarasota, we put on dozens of these kinds of awareness raising events. This is a picture of one that we called the Economics of Happiness Summit. We showed a film called The Economics of Happiness, a wonderful film by Helena Norberg Hodge, who did some great work on looking at the traditional Tibetan culture of Ladakh and how they cultivated sustainability. Very interesting. Lots of Buddhists involved in this kind of regenerative work. Very curious. But we showed this great film about different sustainable economic innovations that people were pioneering all over the world. And then we had a World Cafe discussion where people talked about, what of these solutions could be useful for us here in Sarasota? What could we do to build a more resilient and regenerative local economy? We did many, many things like this. And it was wonderful, and lots of people came, and we slowly started to see a direction emerging out of all of this. Because the starting out stage is great, and awareness raising events are great. We need to continue doing them throughout the process, but ultimately it's not enough. Eventually, if we're just talking about creating change, people are going to get bored and they're going to start to leave. So we need to, at that stage, start to move into deepening, which is about really getting honest with ourselves about what's working and what's not, what's catching people's interest and what's not. Because we typically still have very limited capacity at this point. We can't do it all. So we focus in on that and we demonstrate that our ideas can have real impact in the world, that they can make our communities better, that they can improve quality of life, that they can help those in need. So our first practical project for Transition Sarasota is called the Suncoast Gleaning Project, and actually still continues to this day. I think at this point we've surpassed the 500,000 pounds of produce donated mark. The Suncoast Gleaning Project brings volunteers out to local farms that have surplus produce that's going to go to waste. for one or another reasons. It's not going to make it to market next week, or the farmer's going to till that field under to replant. And we go out and harvest that produce and donate it to the local food banks to benefit the food insecure in our community. And this does a lot of different things. It's a kind of win-win-win-win. The farmer gets a tax deduction for the full produce amount, full value of the produce that they donate. The food banks get free produce that they can then pass on. Those who rely on emergency food assistance get an option for healthier eating. And volunteers get to take home a bag of produce for themselves. So it's been a tremendously popular project. Lots of articles and stories in the media about it. And it's really had ripples far out beyond the beginning. When we were just working with one farm, now we're working with many farms throughout our area. Also influenced the local food bank to move more towards fresh local produce. And even in 2014, got contacted by the Florida Department of Agriculture as they were setting up a program to pilot gleaning projects throughout the state and wanted to use ours as a model. So that's been fantastic. And one effect that it had was opening the door to connecting for us. Of course, we're connecting from the very beginning of this process, but in the beginning, we're mostly connecting with like-minded individuals and like-minded groups, the usual suspects. And I think that's because we haven't proven ourselves yet. We haven't demonstrated that our ideas really have power. And a lot of people are waiting to see if we're for real or not. But once we can do something like a Suncoast Gleaning Project that can really show this work has real benefits to the community, that opens the door to a much wider connecting with potential funders and media and local businesses, local government, key cultural institutions, and helping bring them together into a more coherent movement for change. So following on the success of the Suncoast Gleaning Project, we launched Greater Sarasota's Eat Local Week, which brought together dozens of partners, still does every year, to put on dozens of different events celebrating the best of local food and farming in our area, as well as an Eat Local resource guide and directory that maps our whole local food system. And easier for people to find local produce. This is a picture of some of the organizers of the first annual Eat Local Week, receiving a proclamation from one of our county commissioners. And both of these projects, the Eat Local Week and the Eat Local Guide, really help to weave lots of different farms and farmers markets and community gardens and restaurants that were using local produce, and all sorts of other nonprofit organizations around composting and water conservation and all sorts of different issues to come together and to amplify our voices as a visible movement for change in the community. And this had the effect of getting all these different players working more together with each other, but also growing the local food movement in general. In fact, from 2011 to 2016, the number of listings in our Eat Local guide grew almost 300% in 5 years. Some of these were businesses that we just didn't know about in 2011 and we found out about later. But the vast majority of them were new farms and new community gardens and school gardens and value-added producers, people, doing fermentation, mushrooms and honey and all sorts of things, starting up new businesses because this atmosphere had been generated that was conducive to that. So if we do connecting well, that can open a further door to the building stage. Can bring in more resources, more expertise, more support to really scale this work up to something that is having a major impact on the local community. That's really changing the story that community is telling about its future, where it's headed. So I initiated a number of building projects towards the end of my time with Transition Sarasota, but unfortunately, none of them came to fruition before I resigned in 2016 and started working for the national organization. But there are many transition initiatives around the world that have thrived at this building stage, and give you a few examples of what that might look like. So this is the Victory Garden Initiative in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which spun off early from Transition Milwaukee. And it started with a Memorial Day Garden Blitz, where they transformed dozens of lawns into edible food gardens in the course of a weekend. And this just only kept building momentum to the point at which they've now installed over 6,000 edible gardens throughout the city of Milwaukee. Just a massive feat. And have created a Victory Garden urban farm that is an educational center, donates all its produce, works with thousands of school kids throughout the greater Milwaukee area every year. We could also look to Liège in Belgium, where the local transition initiative there started a project called the Liège Food Belt, which has now grown into a network of 15 worker-owned food cooperatives, farms, breweries, wineries, granaries, produce markets, bicycle delivery services, land sharing services. It is part of a whole regional strategy of local food as economic development that is now strongly supported by their regional government and is raising millions of pounds for new startup businesses, or euros. We'll get to pounds. Beyond food, thing that a lot of transition initiatives do when they reach the building stage is starting community-owned renewable energy cooperatives. So instead of some big investor-owned utility, putting a bunch of solar panels over a farm field, these community-owned renewable energy companies are raising sometimes tens of millions of pounds from small local investors to put up photovoltaic arrays or windmills at the community scale. This one from Transition Town Brixton, they were putting up these panels on public housing to reduce the energy bills of their community's most economically disadvantaged residents. And some of these have grown huge. Bath and West Community Energy, also in England, has now done 35 community-owned solar projects, enough to power over 150,000 houses. Also in Brixton, where we heard about the photovoltaic arrays on project housing, they created a community currency, local complementary currency. This is not meant to replace the national currency, but to serve as a complement to it, to encourage people to spend their money at local businesses so that wealth keeps circulating locally instead of getting siphoned off back to corporate headquarters, exacerbating inequality. And the Brixton Pound is known around the world for their 10-pound note featuring hometown hero David Bowie. But one of the largest complementary currency in the UK, and the largest one that a transition initiative has started, was in Bristol, England's second largest city, where there were over 500 businesses that accepted the currency. You could pay by text, get bills out of ATM. The mayor took his full salary in it. You could use it to pay your energy bills or ride the bus. Could even pay some of your taxes in it. And they shut down the first iteration of that recently, but are planning for the next iteration now. So lots of transition initiatives all over the world have created these kind of community currencies that really are changing people's ideas about what a local economy is. And some transition initiatives have even become community redevelopment agencies. This one was created in the town where transition started, in Totnes, England, working to revitalize this defunct dairy factory right in the center of town that had been sitting around for over a decade, just falling apart and becoming a major eyesore for the community. And community members rallied around this, and they created a project called Atmos Totnes. And through thousands of different contributions from community members, came up with a plan that included the biggest arts and culture venue in their region, that included eco hotel and green retirement homes, and lots of co-working space for local sustainable businesses, a local foods cafe, and a health and wellness center. And although they're still working to get this passed through, I think that this is a really important idea, that the community itself can choose its own future, chart its own future through redevelopment. In so many places in this country and other countries, developers are basically, just running the table. They're deciding what our future looks like, but local communities have the power to take this back and decide how they're going to develop according to their own values. And then last example, Ungersheim village in transition in France. So the mayor of Ungersheim watched one of the early documentaries about the transition towns movement called Transition 1.0, and got so inspired by it, he rallied his whole government around it. And they created a 21-point plan and immediately started putting it into practice. And they've done things like banned pesticides and herbicides throughout their entire town, converted to 100% organic school meals. They have built out enough solar to provide more than 5 times as much energy as they need in the entire town, and used public lands for the purposes of creating eco-villages and regenerative farms and community kitchens. And even have encouraged bringing back the horse as a form of transportation, taking some kids to school. So this is an example of what can happen when the bottom-up power of local communities meets the top-down power of local governments. And really see incredible changes. So those first 4 stages of transition are really, how do we scale up at a community level? This 5th stage of Daring to Dream is about, how we can really have an impact on higher levels of scale, on the national level, on the global level, because we know we are facing global problems, and one local initiative, no matter how powerful, no matter how inspiring, is not going to make that much of a dent. But what if we had thousands of local initiatives operating at that building stage, and we could connect the dots between them to show that there's a real viable alternative to the status quo, which most people don't currently see. I mean, if you look on the news or listen to a presidential debate, where are we going as a society? It seems to be, maybe business as usual with a little bit of greenwashing around the edges. And a lot of people are not dumb. They realize this is not enough. There's a lot of despair out there. There's a lot of grief, a lot of apathy as a result. But could we actually do this? Could we actually bring a real sense of credible hope by showing all these different local initiatives that are putting in place pieces of the future that we need? I think so. And I think possibly even more in years to come, as the climate crisis continues, as existing systems continue to break down. More and more people will be searching out alternatives. And if we can do this right, if we can do enough of this work in advance, maybe we provide another path. People can go towards a regenerative future instead of, some kind of dark authoritarian nightmare that also seems, like too much of a possibility in our times. And, the good news is it's already happening. As I mentioned before, there are 1,000 transition initiatives around the world, 50 countries. But more importantly, there's this wider movement of movements. In his 2007 speech for the Pioneers Conference in California, environmentalist Paul Hawken estimated that there were 130,000 groups around the world working for social and environmental justice. And subsequently, he created a website called Wiser Earth, then wiser.org, that documented 114,000 such groups around the world. So the number is probably many, many more than that. He said it's the biggest movement in the world, but a lot of people are unaware of it because it doesn't come under one single umbrella. It doesn't have one charismatic leader. But I think that's how it needs to be, right? It needs to be these kind of decentralized solutions, not some big top-down thing. So lots of different ways to get involved with all of this. I think the key question for each of us is, what do I feel called to do in these times of great transition? So many things that we could possibly do. When we tap into that feeling of a deep calling, of deep sense of purpose, we're more creative, we're more impactful, we're willing to go the extra mile. So I think it's not about asking what is the best thing that I can possibly do, but what am I most called to do in these extremely pivotal times in the whole history of humanity. You know, these are the times that the Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was preparing us for. These are the times that are really calling to us to step into our Shambhala warriorship. And I think we are the ones that we're waiting for. So if you want to dig deeper into this stuff about regenerative activism, transition towns, evolutionary change, lots more resources available at transitionnetwork.org. In my book, The Regeneration Handbook, which is available from New Society Publishers, and at my new website, evolutionarychange.org. And I really just appreciate you all for being here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, taking the time, listening, and I look forward to some discussion to come.
Don, would you like to unshare? Oh, there you are. Okay, and I thank you all for coming today, and we are now going to move into the time when we will open it up for everyone and invite you to have a conversation.